We often don't think about work as a way to worship God, but we should. When God created Adam, he gave him a job to tend the garden. In the same way, God has given us jobs to take what he has created, tend to it, and create something new with it. In this episode, we talk about a perspective shift on work and how it can lead us closer to Jesus when we view it as an opportunity to worship him.
Welcome to the Olive Shoots Family Podcast, where we talk about family and parenting, homesteading, and the things God is leading us towards. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brittany. We've been married for 3 years, have one little boy, and just got our first piece of land where we plan to build and start our homestead. We are passionate about the family unit and getting back to the basics of the way God created us to live. We have big dreams and are learning what it looks like to pursue those dreams while first trusting God's leading.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. I think the first thing we think about when we think about work is not necessarily worship. Doesn't even come close to it sometimes. But I think when we look at the Bible and we look at the biblical story, that when we view characters in the Bible and how they embraced their work life, what they did pointed to their relationship with Jesus, or pointed to what God had charged them to do in their life. And just like Britt mentioned in the intro, that starts with Adam. So when we go all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2, we get God forming and creating the world and forming and creating man. And one of the first things that he tells Adam to do is to tend the garden. And this is chapter 2. This is the fall, sin. It enters into the world in chapter 3. And at the very beginning of humanity, God is saying, you have a role to play in this world. And that's to tend the garden, to take care of it, and to subdue the earth, to make the rest of the world look like the garden. So that's a really cool example, even from the very beginning of time, before sin ever even entered the world, that man had a job to do, that he was tasked with work.
Yeah. And then even when Jesus enters the picture, as he grows up, he works, and he's a carpenter, and that was his job all the way up until he started his ministry, which was only the last 3 years of his life. And so for, I don't know, probably at least 15 years, if not more, because they started work earlier back then. He was working, and he was making money and building stuff and doing stuff with his hands. So even like Jesus, the most perfect man who could have come to earth and just snapped his fingers at any point and had meals and had no need to actually provide for himself. Not that he did that, but he could have. He still worked and made a living and did stuff with his hands. He didn't just sit around.
Yeah. I really like that example, because like trades and crafts in the Roman era, you would learn from your dad, or you would learn from your master. So you would apprentice under someone who is a master craftsman or master tradesman, and you would learn how to do something by watching them and by learning the skill and the trade. And even Jesus, who is perfect, who is God incarnate, would have apprenticed under someone to learn his craft and his trade of being a carpenter. And he valued that, even though that wasn't a necessary step in his ministry, but he still valued it enough to make a point to earn a living, to do work, and to create things, just like the rest of humanity does. And then you also have stories like Paul, where his primary goal and his mission in life is to travel from city to city and place to place and share the gospel and pastor new churches. But even him at some point in his ministry, he realized that the area he was going to wasn't going to be able to financially support him to only do ministry and to only preach the gospel and to only go around in the community and pay for his food and his living while he's doing that. So he became a tent maker, and he used the skills and the trade that he had acquired in his life to finance and to survive while he was doing the things that God had called him to do.
Yeah. And then there's Lydia, who we don't know a whole lot about her, but she had a really successful business, and through that she was then able to give to the church. And so that's just another example of work not just benefiting ourselves, but also whenever we earn whatever we're earning, we're able to then give to the church or give to those around us, and so we can bless others through our work. And I think we just kind of like to, when we were talking about this, we just kind of like to say that work is taking what God has created and then creating something new with it. Now, obviously, that's not the dictionary definition of work, but when we view our daily work, and not everything that we do God created. Obviously, God didn't create a computer, and that's a lot of work. Is centered around that. But when we view our daily work as taking what God created, or taking the mind He created in us, and then using that to create something new, or just to make the world a better place, we're being images of the Creator, God, because that's what He did. He created the world from nothing, but then He put Adam in it to use what He created and make it better. And so when we do our job as worship, and we're viewing it as worshiping Him, then we are reflecting the same thing that He did in the very beginning, as of creating the world.
Yeah. And I think today, even in jobs where we wouldn't immediately think that those jobs are a reflection of our Creator God, and how He has given us the authority and the ability in His likeness to go out and create other things. I think of jobs of like garbage collection. That's one of those jobs that it seems like it's one of those jobs that's like a fallback for anyone's example of a job that doesn't fit something normal. It's like a trash collector or a garbage collector. But even in that job, where it's like, okay, you're going around and you're collecting the garbage on the side of the road, and how can that be a reflection of a Creator God? But when you put that in the context of you are living in a community of people, you're living in a larger context than just our individual lives. And so how there has created a value in our societies that, because of the way we live today, someone has created a role where they can come in and serve and help those around them by taking away the stuff that is unwanted and unneeded. And it's creating a necessary role in our communities. And then there's a creative aspect of it, of okay, then what do we do with that? And if you look back on the hundreds of years of history of what have we done with just waste and things like that, there's progression in it, and there's an advancement in how we deal with those type of things. So even in a job that we may not typically think about as reflecting the Creator, there is purpose and there's value in tending and shaping and helping manage and grow to work and to jobs.
Yeah. And I think that, like, obviously we know that we were created to work and not just sit around and do absolutely nothing. But sometimes it's hard to view our daily work as worship. And so, like, one of my questions as we were kind of talking through this was, what about when it's a really hard season, or we're doing a job that we don't really like, or that we didn't want to do? Like, how do we view that job as worship when it's difficult for us to even want to go to work? Or whenever we absolutely love our job and it's everything we dreamed of doing, and the enemy likes to come in and whisper lies and just distort it and make some small difficult part of the day seem to make you hate your job. Like, even I think it goes both ways, because even when you absolutely love your job, I think there's definitely days and times where it is difficult to continue to do and to continue to view it as an act of worship whenever you just have a rough day. And so I think that, like, for me, my work is to be a homemaker. I'm raising Emerson and taking care of our house and all the things that go along with that. And it's what I wanted to do as I was, like, as a younger child. I would say that's what I want to do. I want to be a stay-at-home mom, and I want to raise our kids. And so I'm doing exactly what I dreamed of doing, but I definitely have days where I'm like, I'm missing out on so much. And or I am not able, like, I'm not able to do, work, or this was a hard day. I just didn't like it. And I think that, I just had one of those days recently, and Nathan just had to remind me, like, this is what you wanted to do, and it's good. And yeah, there's hard days, but like, reminding me, just pointing me back to Jesus. And then after that moment passes, I can recognize that that's what I just said. That was the enemy just trying to come in and distort the job that I'm doing and make it seem not good enough, or waste of time, or the hard days are too hard, find something else to do, kind of thing. But I think that whenever we have that perspective shift and we're just trying our best, even on those hard days, to view it as worship, then we're able to take those hard seasons and makes us enjoy our job more, even if we're not really loving it.
Yeah.
Is your baby or toddler teething? I'm always looking for natural products to give my baby instead of over-the-counter medicines that often contain artificial colors, flavors, added sweeteners, and other non-essential ingredients. Earthly's Teeth Tamer has been great. It's made from whole cloves and catnip, which works to reduce pain and swelling and provides a feeling of calmness and relaxation. My baby loves the taste of it, and I can tell it gives him relief. That's a win-win in my book. It's even effective for adults. It can help with pain from cavities, root canals, wisdom teeth removal, braces, and more. It's non-GMO, made in the USA, and made with 100% organic ingredients. If you're interested in Teeth Tamer, click the link in the show notes and check out the other amazing Earthly Wellness products while you're at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's been times since we've been married where one of us or both of us have come home, and you just have those days where it's like it was a rough day at work, and I am just really struggling with my boss, or with coworkers, or with my responsibilities, or all of the above. And those hard seasons, or when we have a job, or we're doing a responsibility or something like that we just don't enjoy, that it's important to pause and remind ourselves that there are there are hills and valleys in everything. There are ups and downs in everything. But when we view the mundane or the repetition or the stuff that we don't necessarily love doing as a part of the grander view of what we're stepping into, of working for the Lord and creating things just like our God created us, and we're benefiting others, we're putting something into the world, we're making something, we're doing something of value, that even when there is a hard season or when we don't particularly love our job, and maybe that's a stepping stone to something else that God is leading you to or putting on your heart, but maybe it's just you need to sit and pause and reflect on what does it look like for me to view this thing that I don't really like doing, and reframe it in a way that you can see God's glory and his goodness and his love for you in those things, in providing that job for you or providing that work for you. And then to also reflect on, okay, well, what is my job? What is my work actually doing to benefit those around me? And how am I helping other people around me in my work, even if it is something that I don't necessarily love doing at this moment?
Yeah, and that reminds me of a message that we heard at church, I guess a few months ago now, probably. And they were just talking about the story of the feeding the 5,000. And just, we hear that story all the time. But it was just kind of a different perspective, because we just kind of, when you think about it, Jesus, we know takes a small amount of bread and a very small amount of fish and then feeds 5,000 people with it. But I don't think I've ever actually sat there and just visualized that happening. And we heard this sermon, and then we also were watching The Chosen, and it kind of, tries to portray that a little bit. And so both of those back to back was just like, wow, I hadn't actually thought about that in that way. And just there wasn't just an insane amount of bread and fish all of a sudden. I mean, maybe that is what it was, but kind of the way The Chosen showed it and how our pastor explained it was the disciples are there and they step out in faith with that little bit. So like Andrew brings the bread and fish and he's like, here, I have this. I don't know if you can do anything with it. And then Jesus blessed it and prayed over it. And then they went and gave out what little bit they had. And then, they probably looked back down and then there was more for them to give. And they're like, okay. And then looked down and there was more for them to give. And so the more they gave, the more they had to give. But if they hadn't given that first amount, if Andrew hadn't brought that first small amount, and then the disciples hadn't taken those steps to the people to give out what tiny bit they had at the beginning, then would they have had more to give? Like, we don't know that. And so I think oftentimes for me at home, when I feel like I don't have more to give, I'm worn out, my kids have worn me out, or I didn't sleep at all, or whatever, just taking that next step when we're faithful with that inadequate, unqualified, not enough that we have, and we serve our family, or we continue to serve our boss at work, or wherever that looks like for you. When we continue to take that next step, even when we don't feel like it's enough, God's always going to give us more to give. We're not going to run out of being able to give whenever we're serving God and whenever we're serving what we love. So kind of how he broke it down is, when you're serving, you're going to learn to love what you serve. So like, you might not love your job, and I always love my family, but I might not always love the job that I'm doing, but I will learn to love my family even more. And you can learn to love your job in a different way whenever you are serving it from the heart of worshiping Jesus. And I think the reverse of that is also true because, like I said, I'm at home, so I love my family. So I'm gonna continue to serve what I love. I'm gonna continue to serve my husband and serve my kids, even when I might not want to in the moment. And I believe that stepping out and doing that, even when I don't want to, I'm gonna have more to give. God's not gonna just let me run empty, especially when I'm looking to Him to fill me up. And I will run empty if I try to do it all in my own strength. But I think that's such a powerful part of viewing our work as worship is he's gonna sustain us on those hard days whenever we have been having the perspective of worshiping Him throughout our job.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy when you're at your job, to just embrace someone else's negativity, or to just if there's a coworker that's particularly annoying or aggravating, and like the rest of your coworkers, they know who that is. They know, like, if that person is hard to work with, then everyone knows it. But if you're viewing your work as worship and as an opportunity to give praise to the Creator and Lord, that reframes and reshifts how you respond to that in the moment. That it becomes less about, I'm just going to join in on everyone else being aggravated at this one person and just, say stuff about them behind their back or make fun of them or make jokes or whatever that is. And that will be reframed into, how can we be praying for this person? Maybe they're going through something in their life that we need to be thinking about and praying for them for. Or maybe it's just, the way that I can respond to this is just reframe their jokes or reframe their frustration in this person and try to come up with a solution and try to move things and shift things in a way that leads to a positive outcome or something God glorifying, instead of just jumping into that gossip and negativity and things like that. And just like what Britt was saying, that you begin to love what you serve, and having that mindset in your workplace, whether you work, in a large company or business, or you just work by yourself and you think of your customers as those who you're serving, that when you think about how can I glorify God by doing this task or doing this thing or working on this pitch or whatever that might be, how can I glorify God? Our son is waking up from a nap, so if you hear some noises, that's what it is. But how can we glorify God in that moment and not just step into maybe what the enemy is trying to get us to step into? How do we, just like God created us and chose us to tend His garden and to tend His creation, how do we tend His creation in the work that He has given us today? And I think it's really important when we frame work in that context, to then talk about how do we teach that to our kids? How do we set a good example of what work is to our kids? And it starts off by just being that good example, by practicing what you preach. Don't complain about the work that you have to do, but instead frame it up as an opportunity to serve the Lord.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one, because when we complain about what we're doing, then obviously it doesn't show our kids that we're viewing what we're doing as purposeful or as for God. And I also think that a way that we can kind of teach them is giving them work, even at a young age, giving them age appropriate chores that they're able to do, and then using those as opportunities to train them and to point them to Jesus, and not just do these chores because you have to do it, but like explaining to them, even like I said, from like 3 years old or 2 years old, when they don't know yet that this is a chore that you're gonna do on a daily basis or whatever, and the Bible says that we do everything without complaining or grumbling, and so we're gonna do this with a happy heart, and not just faking it, but then also, like the Bible says, we do everything as if you're working for the Lord. So how can you help mom unload the dishwasher and view it as working for the Lord? And I think that, like, just framing that up, even from like I said, 3 years old, them grasping onto that could be huge, just because if they could, like, I haven't grabbed on to how unloading the dishwasher can be work for the Lord, like that's not something on the forefront of my mind all the time. But if that's something that we're saying to them, then for one, it's on my mind more, and two, if they really grab onto that, then I mean that just sets them up for a life of learning to view their work as working for the Lord, regardless of how small the task is.
Yeah.
I work in construction, and it's pretty regular that I ache and hurt after a long day's work. But I also want a healthy and natural solution to my pain without the long-term side effects that come from over-the-counter pills. I've been turning to Earthly's Pain Potion for day-to-day relief. Its pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory herb combination have helped me to start my day after waking up sore and to rest after lifting heavy objects all day long. When I need extra or more targeted relief, I use Earthly's Pain Relief Rub with St. John's Wort, yarrow, and full spectrum CBD. Just rub a small amount of the cream on the painful areas for fast soothing and quick relief. The Pain Relief Rub is also safe for pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, as well as children ages 1 and up. I recommend both the Pain Potion and the Pain Relief Rub because they help me get back to my work when I need it most, but also because they are made by a family-owned, made in the USA, and organic company. If you are interested, click the link in the show notes and check out other Earthly Wellness products while you're there. Yes, the link does help support our family. Earthly is generous enough to give a small percentage back to us if you use our link. But I wouldn't be endorsing them if I didn't truly believe in their products.
Yeah, last week we talked about your family mission and just how that can be a driving factor of moving forward. And it's things like this of like, okay, well, how does unloading the dishwasher, how is that worship? And then you can point back to, well, in our home, we want to be generous with the things that God has given us. And sometimes that's generous with our time. And so it's taking the time to unload the dishwasher and help mom and dad so that we can all be together as a family, because we want to be generous with the things God has given us, and we value time together as a family. And so in order to make that happen, in order to do the things that God is leading us to, then sometimes that requires some work, and you can help us do that work. And explaining to our kids the value behind work and the reason why we do work, not just settling for the easy answer of, I said to do it, so do it, but giving the why behind it and how their work actually fits into the greater direction and mission and purpose of your family as a unit as a whole. And of course, that will take a lot of time for them to catch that and to latch on to, oh, we do work, or we do chores, or we do these things because this is who we are as a family, or because this is who I was created to be in Christ. And that takes a long time to catch, but it just takes that training up our children in the way that they should go, that long-term mindset of how are we raising them to see the bigger picture of what God has called them to be?
Yeah, and I think another way that we can kind of help them to view work as worship and to be excited about it is to let them help with things that they are excited about, even when it may take us longer to get it done. So like we've been saying, from a young age, obviously whenever Emerson gets a little bit older, like in a year, if I'm letting him help me prepare a meal or cut fruit with a safe knife, that's going to take way longer for a 2-year-old to help me than it is for me to do it. But he's going to think that's super cool in the moment. And one day he's not going to think it's cool for me to ask him to help me chop vegetables.
And if you can hear him in the background, food is like his love language. Like he loves food. So getting to participate in making that would be really cool for him.
Yeah. And like I said, it's going to take longer to get it done, but it's something that he would be excited about. And so if he's excited about something he's doing that is considered work, and at some point, like I said, he will very much consider that as a chore that he might not always want to do. But in the moment, he's excited about it, and it's something that will be easier for him to view as working for the Lord because it's something he wants to do. And another example would be like getting to build or mow or do yard work with Dad. Like, again, a 16-year-old is not always going to be super pumped about mowing the yard, but a 5-year-old thinks that's the coolest thing ever, to get to help or sit in Dad's lap or whatever mowing the yard. And so just letting them do things that they're excited about, that even though it may take longer to get done in the moment, it's just building that foundation of, one, work isn't always something you're gonna hate. We're not saying do everything unto the Lord and you're never gonna like it, but it's work and we have to work. Like, work can be fun. We like our work sometimes. You don't hate every aspect of your work, and if you do, I don't know, maybe find a different job. But if we only give them chores and this is your chore chart and you have to do it, and it's all stuff that is just never enjoyable, then they're gonna struggle to ever view work as something that can be enjoyable.
Well, I also think it's important as parents to not just use those verses as weapons to get our kids to do what we want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's important to view it not in that way, but rather in the sense that God created us to live in a certain way, and that by following his rule, and not rule in a sense of like there's a checklist of rules that we have to do to live this certain way, and if we do those, then it's going to be perfect. But in a sense that God is Lord in our life, and that his authority in our life has said, this is the way I have designed you to live. And this way is going to bless you the most in your life. And work is a part of that. Work unto the Lord without grumbling and complaining. And when our kids are not going to understand that at first. They're not going to understand that the work that I'm doing as a 16-year-old mowing lawns is actually going to help me when I'm 26 and starting my own business. Or, like that doesn't compute with them in the moment, but that long-term direction and training of the things that we're teaching our kids by teaching them how to work is so valuable. I think we can see that in the world today. But yeah, it's important not to weaponize those things, but rather to frame it up, and this is how you were created to live.
Yeah, and then also I think that using those verses, particularly the ones we've talked about, is also an opportunity for us to practice apologizing to our kids, because I am confident that we even as much as we like to not complain, I know that I complain. I know that Nathan complains every once in a while. And when we're teaching our kids, hey, don't complain about your work, then there's a good chance that if they hear us at some point, they're going to call us out for that. Like, Dad, you're complaining about mowing and you said not to complain. Or, Mom, you're complaining about cooking dinner and you said not to do that. So that's just an opportunity of like, you're right. I was wrong. I should not have complained, and humbling ourselves, and then also for them to see, yeah, we messed up, and we admitted we messed up, and we're gonna try not to do it again, kind of thing. And so it's just like by teaching them those types of verses and using it to encourage them, it's also majorly holding us accountable
Right.
to their same standard, which
Yeah.
we should be held. But it's not just by our spouse now, it's by our little 3-year-old or 4-year-old who's
Yeah.
gonna correct us for complaining, because I'm sure that will be a big topic with a 3 or 4-year-old.
And those kind of keeping accountable moments, when your 3-year-old keeps you accountable, that's the one that hurts the most, right?
And but it's also probably the one that's the easiest to take.
Absolutely. And the last thing in this, I just think that in our work we can remind our kids and remind ourselves that what we're actually doing by doing these chores or these things is we're enjoying and we're stepping into what God has already created for us. That ultimately everything comes from Him. And so when we think about like cooking or cutting fruits or cutting vegetables or things like that to help mom in the kitchen, it's like God has given us these things for us to eat and to enjoy,
yeah.
and to provide for us. If it's mowing outside or building something, it's like, the things that the wood that we're using to build with actually came from the trees that God made for us. Or, mowing outside, it's like like mowing outside is taking care of this little space that God has allowed us to tend to and to own and to take care of. And it's like legally this is our domain, but the reality is like this is the little square acreage that God has given us to tend to, our little garden, if you will. Same thing with like harvesting in the garden. It's like that's such an easy way of taking our kids to see the stages of growth in vegetables and fruit, and to show them how God has grown these things from nothing, from a little seed, into harvest for our family, and to just return back to the biblical roots and the imagery of God as a gardener, pruning and tending to His garden and tending to His creation. Just finding those moments in our parenting of reframing the work and the chores that we are teaching our children to do, and reframing them as ways of we are so thankful to the Lord for allowing us to do these things.
Yeah. I think it's just so neat because, most of the podcasts we've talked about kind of have had a parenting aspect at some point in it, usually. And every time we're like talking through it, in my mind, it's just like, yeah, it's cool to talk about, not cool. It's important to talk about viewing our work as worship before kids. Like it's important to do that as a teenager or as a young adult who doesn't have any kids yet. But it just takes everything to another level when you're talking about training your kids in the same thing that we're trying to live out. And it's like it's that constant accountability, and it's also that constant like we want to do better because we want them to see not us being perfect, but us truly striving after Jesus and striving to do the things that we're preaching. And so I think it's just like in a way that's never happened before, we have even more accountability to practice what we're preaching, because we're teaching our kids who see us live out every aspect of our life for the most part. And so they're gonna see us screw up, obviously, and they're gonna see us do it well, and they're gonna take all that into account. And it's not just like when we go to church or we go to work, those people see us for that short amount of time every day, and we can be somebody different there. Not that we should, but they don't see every part of us, and our kids are learning from every aspect of how we handle the situations that are hard, the situations that we love. And so I just think it just brings me back to that every time we've done a podcast, that we're just go back to, all right, well, what does that look like with kids? Well, it looks like more accountability, and it looks like more responsibility in a good way. And just that constant reminder of, like I said, just we want to do better because we want them to want to do better also.
Yeah. So reframing our mindset around the work that we do, both at our jobs, maybe at home if you're a stay-at-home mom, even at home just as a dad, as you get off of your work and you get off of your job and you come home to maybe work at home, whatever that looks like, and just reframing that work as a way to worship our Creator and to step into the life and the purpose that God has created us for. And then, just like Britt said at the end here, just how when we have that perspective shift, that it becomes magnified even more so when we talk about teaching that to our kids. And so I hope this was really helpful to all of you guys listening, that together we can just begin to see the things that God is leading us to as a way to praise Him and honor Him and give Him all the glory in our lives. So Emerson says bye. We'll see you guys next week, and just thank y'all so much for listening. Bye.